I just want to talk about a model that I mentioned last week, which was to do with the rise and fall of civilizations, and Arnold Toynbee, and what that had to do with myth and narrative. And one of the things that, has that moved on now to historic?
Yes, that's working.
Yeah, okay. One of the things that we talked about last week is that each society or culture or community will often have a phase that's absolutely historic, that's taken them to where they are. It's never to be forgotten. And there was total unity of purpose. And they really moved from one stage to another. The issue is that things often start to fall apart, either to do with changed external circumstances or changed internal. You know, a king might die or something, or a very successful group of leaders might begin to break up for one reason or another. But things start to fall apart, and the thing that Toynbee talks about, and I mentioned this last week, is that there are typically 6 reasons why a civilization falls apart. And we talked last week about the mechanicalness of copying, where they say, well, what do our neighbors do? Let's copy that. Or they come up with something new and it becomes new wine in an old bottle. Or idolization of the institution, or idolization of the self. They fall in love with themselves, in short, or they fall in love with the technique. But more important than anything, and this is Toynbee's observation, is that what the organization or culture needs is within the culture or the organization. And now it started to freeze halfway through. So I am going to
just try it again, don't panic.
Yeah.
You might want to close your Discord because the notification sound is coming up again and again.
Okay, yeah. So what Toynbee basically was suggesting is that as things fall apart in the historic phase, beware the danger of going into a sort of scientific phase where you start to analyze everything. Beware too the danger of falling in love with yourself. A lot of organizations or cultures, when things start to fall apart, they start to break things down into bits and start to analyze everything. But what Toynbee's basically arguing is that it's very important to go back to the heroic phase, where typically a small group of individuals, often not sort of close to each other in an organization, will often have the insights that the organization or the culture needs to move on to the next phase. And typically it's because they come with a different set of experiences so that they can see things. So sometimes a small coalition of visionary people get together, often led by 1 or 2 charismatic people, and they see what happens in the next phase, needs to happen in the next phase. Now, then what you've got is a clash between the existing coalition of the people who led the organization during the previous phase, who are often in love with their old way of doing things. And you've got the small group, often at a much junior level in the organization, who see what needs to be done. And this is a really interesting period because it's what was brilliantly marked in Greek culture, because they had the early heroic phase, and then there was, before they moved into the historic, there was the emergence of Greek tragedy and comedy, and that often portrayed a clash between the individual. So a play like Antigone, a Greek tragedy like Antigone, is about the clash between the individual and the collective. And
Sandy, are you supposed to be showing us charts?
yeah, has it not come up?
No, you haven't put it up since you took it down.
Oh, okay, gosh.
Don't panic.
But they were very elegant. I could nearly see them with your word vision.
So share screen. Yeah.
There you go. It's coming.
Oh, yeah. So can you see this one?
Yeah, it's coming. Yes, that's working.
Yeah. So basically, what we're talking about is don't move into the sort of scientific phase of analyzing and paralysis. That the answers invariably within the organization, within the community. So it's all about reverting back to the heroic phase or listening to the heroic voices within. But then it often moves into the tragic phase where either the organization or the culture kills off the heroic spirit, that which could renew. And I worked with Nokia for a while, and they started to fall apart with the emergence of the iPhone. All that they needed was within the organization. They had anticipated this years before, but they were not listening to the voices within. So effectively, the heroes within were not listened to. So essentially, what this seems to suggest is a model that would fit in many ways the whole Irish worldview, which is a sort of cyclical model of every year. The Irish calendar that you would remember from Dolores Whelan is all about a cycle of seeding, growth, harvesting, death, seeding, growth, harvested, death. But other cultures don't have that. And so they lose that spirit of rebirth. And so essentially what Toynbee's model suggesting seems to fit very much the Irish orientation to time, that every year is a dying and a rebirth. The heroic is the rebirth. Then it's managing the clash between the old king and the new. And I think we've seen on a number of occasions how in the Irish myth tradition, the old king, do you remember it with the story of Cormac MacArt and I think Lou, where the new king recognizes, in Cormac MacArt's case, Louis recognized the wisdom of the judgment, the orientation to law that Cormac offered. And it was the same with Lou, that he was the new king. So they handed over. But in Toynbee's case, he's basically saying this does not often happen. And the culture kills the heroic within, and the result is one of those 6 reasons to decline. So essentially what we've got here is a cyclical model of leadership and kingship. And basically the therefore of that would be that there is no such thing as a stable anything. Things are always falling apart. And in some ways, there's a brilliance in the Irish agricultural model of year on year death and then starting again, rebirth. But I think we'll see in many of the king's stories how this transition does or does not happen. Anyway, we have already covered Lou and we've covered Cormac, and in both cases there was a peaceful transfer of power. And then we looked at Laura Lynchuk with the horse's ears, and I think that was also a case where the king had an insight. And then Conor O'More last week, didn't we look at an exemplary king who in the Irish tradition, the more power a king has, the more gases are on him. And we saw how Conor O'More last week put his family, his foster brothers, in front of the law of the land, which is pillagers need to be put to death. He didn't do that. He exiled them. That was breaking a gassa, and he started to break one gassa after another. And we saw the destruction very vividly portrayed by Chowbang last week in the destruction of the Diegas hostel. Now, then we also carried on, I think, to Conor O'More, and sorry, that was what Conor O'More was about. And then this week we've got Conor MacNessa, or Cruhor MacNessa, and Aoife, you're going to use the Irish form of it, Cruhor, I believe. So anyway, we're going to hear from Aoife, and then we're going to, after the break, hear from Karina, who's going to give another perspective on Conor MacNessa, or Cruhor MacNessa. So over to you, Aoife. You're very welcome, and off you go.